Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to the Exercise Testing Current Trends in Sport-Specific Examples session as part of the Move United Leadership Conference. My name is Krista Rapocchio, and I am the Senior Education Manager with Move United, which was formerly Disabled Sports USA. We would like to thank the Bob Woodruff Foundation for their longstanding commitment and support, allowing us to bring you this virtual opportunity. For those who missed any previous sessions, recordings, and session resources can be found on the conference webpage. This will be the same webpage that you RSVP'd for this session. It's https://moveunitedsport.org/LC session RSVP, and we'll put that in the chat because I know it's a little long. Before turning the show over to our speaker today, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be muted to minimize distractions. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions rather than the chat. Feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and to have any comments or have any conversations with other attendees throughout the session. Make sure to send your chat message to all panelists and attendees to introduce yourself to the whole group to get started. And now I'm going to turn it over to Madi Currie to introduce herself, her organization, and to get us started with this afternoon's session.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Madi Currie, and today I'll be presenting on clinical or laboratory exercise testing with current trends and sport-specific examples. So first, just a little bit about myself. I'm originally from a small town in Mississippi, but I currently live in Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm a recent graduate of Samford University. I received my Bachelor of Science with an emphasis in health sciences, and I currently work at the Lakeshore Foundation as a research assistant, where most of my roles involve taking participants through a 48-week-long research study. Finally, in the fall, I will begin my PhD program in rehabilitative sciences from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I really am so excited to be able to have this opportunity to speak with you all today, so we can go ahead and get started. So just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. We'll discuss current trends of exercise testing. We'll compare and contrast what current testing batteries exist between lab and field-based testing. We'll mention a few disability-specific characteristics for athletes and how implementation can be of benefit to improve the athlete's status in their sport. And finally, we'll explore how individuals and teams can become involved at a university to achieve their own lab values from specific lab-based exercise testing. So before we dive into specifics, I wanted to provide a brief background of the definitions we use when assessing fitness-related measurements. When we examine body composition, we are measuring body fat percentages and weight, lean mass percentages and weight, girth measurements, and bone mineral density. Cardiovascular assessments test the athlete's ability to perform dynamic exercises using large muscle groups for longer periods of time at higher intensities. Musculoskeletal assessments cover both muscular strength and muscular endurance. Strength will refer to the athlete's ability to lift, press, or push for one repetition or attempt at the most weight tolerable. Endurance refers to how long an athlete can hold, curl, or press a specific amount of weight. When we assess balance, we are studying their base level of balance and functional ability. And finally, when working with flexibility, we are strictly working with an athlete's range of motion in their functional muscles. So most commonly, we look at their shoulders, hamstrings, and core muscles. When we're taking repetitive values from our athletes, we typically adhere to three main testing timelines. Pre-testing happens prior to the beginning of the season and before any training adaptations have taken place. Testing during season means that we are looking to see if any fitness-related components have changed as a result of the athlete's training. And finally, post-testing means that we are testing post-season to track final results from training. So first thing is first, how do you know when you should test and how you should test? You should first recognize and decipher what fitness component is being tested and what is most feasible to the athlete. Working in a research setting, it is of course extremely beneficial to have all of the different data sets, but the overall goal when testing is for the benefit of the athlete. So recognizing the best means of achieving these measurements is the most important aspect. We will take a more in-depth approach to these tests in a few slides. However, I did just want to point out a few aspects of what we are viewing here. This is a chart separating field-based and lab-based testing. The most starkly contrasted aspects of separating these two categories are simply the equipment that is readily accessible and available, and how the data is used. With field-based testing, it is by far less expensive and is easier to administer. However, most of the time, field-based tests do not produce as accurate of data as a lab-based test does. This being said, no test is a bad test, and either way, our athletes are still getting the measurements that they will use for training. When speaking on exercise testing trends, due to the feasibility and availability of equipment, sometimes we have a tendency to mix and match our tests. This is fine and there's nothing wrong with that. However, that's only fine if that's something that we're doing consistently across preseason, during season, and post-season testing, excuse me. So if I'm assessing our wheelchair rugby team and we're doing preseason testing and I'm away from home base, I don't have access to a DEXA machine, but I do want to collect body composition data. I choose to collect body circumference measures using only a measuring tape. And I have access to an arm ergometer, so I'll use that for cardio. For muscular strength and endurance, I want to use the same arm ergometer with a new protocol for the Wingate test, and a medicine ball for strength throws. And let's just say we finish off flexibility with the standard back scratch test. When my athletes come back for in-season testing and post-season testing, I'm still going to choose to use the exact same methods and follow the exact same procedures. So when we're assessing only lab-based testing, we of course want to make sure that we're using testing batteries that adequately allow us to maximize the energy and effort of each athlete. For example, you don't want to start testing with a muscular strength test, then hop to flexibility, and then hop to cardiovascular fitness. In doing structured testing, we in essence want to test from the least amount of energy required, building up to the whole body putting in work, to then use balance and flexibility as cool-down mechanisms. So here on this slide, I've arranged the order in which we want to test and layered it with the top 2 most popular methods for each fitness component. So we'll start with our athlete's body composition. Research has shown that the DEXA scanner is proved to most accurately assess the body's bone density, lean, and fat mass percentages. Each scan can cost up to about $125, so it is not the most feasible of tests for the general public. However, teams that have funding and resources to spend for fitness testing should take advantage of this method to track fat mass and fat-free mass. The second most popular test is the bioelectrical impedance analysis, or BIA. BIA evaluates the body's amount of body fat and muscle mass. It's mostly calculated using what is called an Omron, which is a handheld tool, as you can see here, that sends an electrical current through the body. This device measures by calculation how the signal is impeded through different types of tissues. So tissues that contain large amounts of fluid and electrolytes, such as blood, have high conductivity, but fat and bone slow the signal down. When the signal is passing through the body, it provides estimates of body water, from which then body fat is calculated. So moving on to cardiorespiratory fitness, our main use of assessing anyone's cardio is by collecting their VO2 max. So for someone who has no physical disability and is able to walk and run comfortably for a longer period of time, and for someone who does have a physical disability and is comfortable pushing for a longer period of time, this test is gold standard. We will have our athlete place a mask on their face that will collect their respiratory gases. From a calibrated machine, we can see live feedback for their VO2 and also track their exercise intensity using a rating of perceived exertion, or RPE scale. So same goes for METs. MET stands for a metabolic equivalent of task. This shows you how hard you're working and your oxygen uptake. This measurement is also collected using the VO2 mask. It is collected using the individual's respiratory gases as well. The most beneficial thing about these two values is that they do go hand in hand and are able to be collected within the same maximal exertion test. So when you're working with an athlete, you really have to hype them up to ask you to give them all they've got so that they can get their best results back. Also for muscular endurance is our VO2 max test. During these tests, you're asking your athlete to go as hard as they can for as long as they can. While we do have lab values being taken like VO2 and METs, as we've just previously mentioned, time is also a very valuable data point. With this, we are looking more so through their anaerobic power and right at their aerobic capacity. The Wingate arm crank test is also another great universally designed muscular endurance fitness test, as it has differing protocols and is readily available in most labs. In the research study I am on, we use an increase of 10 watts every 2 minutes while tracking RPE in every between minute. This will eventually lead to exhaustion, and their final wattage and time is documented. The #1 most popular muscular test in a lab setting is the Biodex. The Biodex machine can set to either isokinetic, isotonic, or isometric resistance to help measure strength at any place on the body. So for example, it is used in a therapeutic setting to regain gradual strength. But in a lab-based setting, we can perform these tests within 10 to 15 minutes and collect maximum repetitions on both the upper and lower bodies from just one seat. The second most used method is a handheld grip strength dynamometer. This is simply used by squeezing the handle of this machine while the rest of your arm remains in one resting position. The Biodex is also used for balance in a lab-based setting. This balance test was actually created by the UAB Lakeshore Research Collaborative, and instead of a standing test, we created a seated balance test that was derived from the NeuroCom seated balance test. The STAR excursion test is one that falls between lab-based and field-based. However, depending on the age and fall risk status of your individual or athlete, you really want to closely monitor this one. It is a dynamic test that can either be performed using the lower or upper extremities. And then with flexibility, we always want to measure the flexibility of our athletes' joints to ensure fluidity and increasing degrees of range of motion. For active and passive range of motion, you'll use a goniometer to measure and document the degree of the angle, most of the time from the insertion of a joint. These tests are simple to administer if you're being consistent with your measurement angles. So now that we've gone over the most used laboratory-based exercise testing methods for our 6 fitness components, let's look at the efficiency of exercise testing batteries. So when considering efficiency of testing batteries, we want to concentrate on 2 main topics: energy and time. When we are administering exercise testing to our athletes, their energy expenditure is one of the things that we need to keep in mind. As we mentioned before, we would not want to begin a strength test, move to flexibility, and then hop back to a cardio sprint test. We want to structure our testing battery so that the level of exercise intensity increases slowly over a gradual period of testing. And then we are able to use balance and flexibility as cooldowns. We also want to keep in mind the physiology of movement for our athletes. Depending on the functional levels, the amount of movement we must do to warm up the body will be different. So in theory, you want to warm up the larger muscles first before you perform tests that target the finer muscular movements. An example of this would be instructing your athlete to perform large arm circles in both directions for 10 to 30 seconds, and then asking them to curl a dumbbell. When considering time, we know that these tests are not short. For our elite athletes, a VO2 max test can test anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. These times are great for us who are collecting their data. However, we know as soon as we get that athlete out of their hold for the VO2 that they are extremely exhausted. With this, we want to keep in mind how we can similarly structure the timing aspects of these tests. So with all of this in the back of our mind, we also want to ensure the efficacy of our tests. As staff that works directly with our athletes' results, a large goal is to improve upon the validity of each assessment. In improving the validity, this in turn reduces the errors and maximizes the results for players. This means keeping the tests meaningful and consistent. If a team's high performance coach advises that their team needs to have their VO2 max and resting metabolic rate tested every 6 months, then documentation should support how each player was tested and all the values that were tested as well. Improved validity leads to enhanced resources, less room for user error and equipment error, and a lack of redundancy in literature. Laboratory testing and the data that was produced can allow for the increased efficiency and efficacy, which is for the benefit of the athlete. So we'll take a deeper look into how we can increase the efficacy of testing. So when we are considering efficacy in the setting of an exercise testing lab, we're really looking at how we can most accurately and precisely produce a desired result. For our athletes at any given level, we want to be able to consistently measure their exercise testing and fitness values so that these same values can be measured just as precisely at any given point in their athletic career. So here I've just separated out the 6 squares for the 6 fitness components that we've been discussing. We'll observe the components now from a reproducibility, reliability, validity, and subjective perspective. If we focus on these topics, we increase the possibility of reducing error and enhancing the testing experience of the athlete. So I mentioned before the most popular test for each fitness component. For body composition, the DEXA scanner and bioelectrical impedance analysis are the 2 most reliable means of collecting body composition due to the reproducibility. With both pieces of equipment, each method can be easily documented. So for example, we can assume that a seasoned wheelchair rugby athlete who is 30 years old, his first visit, measures 6 foot and 2 inches. When he returns for his in-season testing, his height will have most likely not changed. We use the DEXA to give us values such as fat mass, fat-free mass, and bone density. So in essence, these are the values that we want to see changing. So having a piece of equipment that can analyze this data down to the very percentage yields that it is a very reliable source. When looking at cardio fitness, we want to utilize all physiological components that are related to the amount of oxygen consumption and training intensities. So as you might remember a couple slides back, when we looked at the VO2 and METs, these were the most accurate methods used for testing cardio. However, when we're considering how hard our athletes are working, if we use certain formulas, then we're not actually giving them the amount of credit that they're due. So for example, if we do age predicted heart rate max by subtracting their age from 220, we're only giving them a number to reach during a certain exercise bout. However, if we collect their heart rate reserve, then when we are inserting a training percentage, which is most of the time a higher value than just the heart rate age predicted. Moving on to muscular endurance. Because muscular endurance can measure either upper body or lower body, most of the time it is a subjective measurement. So one piece of equipment that can help increase the efficacy is the Biodex. The Biodex is used in many settings due to the increased balance structure, and this can also be used for muscular endurance, muscular strength, and balance, which segues us into muscular strength. While muscular strength can also be subjective, these 2 methods of collecting strength are both reproducible and can be calibrated to the athlete's specifications. The only aspect of using a 1RM would be to document meticulously. You never want to switch the method that you're using in order to collect their top weight, and you want to remain consistent across all testing time points. Balance may also be subjective. However, the Balance Biodex test is both inclusive and easily adaptable to fit the athlete's specifications, such as height and weight. So in the previous slide, when we looked at the Biodex platform that was created by the foundation, this test measures both core stability and functionality. So finally, flexibility. For flexibility, using a goniometer is always best and easiest to collect range of motion. We can do this both actively and passively, and it is simple and it typically doesn't depend on the anthropometric data of an athlete. So now we'll look at disability-specific characteristics in reference to sport, not specifically regarding the characteristics of the physical or mobility disability itself. So let's start with wheelchair rugby. I first off have to say that these guys are so nice, they're so fun to hang out with. However, when you have to wake them up at 4:30 in the morning and don't allow them to eat so that you can test their resting metabolic rate and body comp, nobody is happy. But in all realness, they are so fun, and let me tell you, they bring the energy at 4:30 like nobody I've met before. So these guys play their positions based on a classification system that ranges based on their functionality. Their training is also based on position, so we can see how this works. Intensity. With these conditions, we need our players to be able to maintain strength and endurance for the entirety of their game. First and foremost, we look at their body composition. Because they push the length of the court during training and during gameplay, they have a high value in fat-free mass. Most of the times when our Paralympic teams come in for testing, we do double up and do their body comp and resting metabolic rates at the same time. So we see that they have high values for muscular strength and muscular endurance. Cardio fitness is also going to be high, and most of the time balance and flexibility will be too. This is due to their year-round training in preparation for all of their tournaments. These players do take part in very serious nutrition plans, weight training, and aerobic activities. So next we'll look at wheelchair tennis. A main component of wheelchair tennis is agility. This encompasses the ability to dual task while controlling speed and hand-eye coordination on the court. Wheelchair tennis players will have less fat-free mass. However, depending on their status within the sport and the intensity in which they practice and play, there's no set zone that we expect to see a tennis player's results. This is solely because tennis has no quote-unquote stereotypical body frame or body type. We also notice that these players have incredible muscular endurance capacity. Tennis has at least 4 points in a game, at least 6 games in a set, and at least two sets in a match. So elite level athletes must have the ability to not drain as quickly, so muscular and mental endurance is a huge component of this sport. Moving on to wheelchair basketball, let me just tell y'all, I considered myself an athlete until I tried to play basketball, and that is really where it went all downhill for me. Wheelchair basketball players, similar to wheelchair rugby players, have a great amount of muscular strength. This sport also encompasses coordination, so we see an increased value of balance and flexibility. Basketball players tend to have a good amount of muscular endurance based on their position, so it is also a really good idea to make notes of this when we are putting our basketball players through exercise and fitness testing. And finally, power soccer. This sport has quickly become one of my favorite sports. At Lakeshore, I was given the opportunity to work with a professor from a university in Virginia to collect survey response data from over 50 power soccer players and coaches. This experience gave me a better insight to the sport and allowed me to make new friends, play something new, and let me just tell you, if you've never driven one of these power chairs, I would suggest getting ones with bumpers because they go so fast, but it is so much fun. Power soccer players have a great deal of fine motor skills, and while these do not necessarily play into exercise testing, 2 adaptations that definitely do are the player's VO2 and heart rate. So increased stimulation automatically accounts for higher heart rate and a higher amount of oxygen being consumed and put out. As I mentioned earlier, giving the players credit by calculating training intensity can account for relative amount of work they are putting in. With these power chair players, it should be an automatic expectancy that we are calculating these values. Another large push for these athletes are the fact that they also train according to their position. This is one reason why many people are attempting to get power soccer to be based on a classification system similar to wheelchair rugby. This would potentially enable this sport to become ranked within the Paralympic spectrum. So now that we know what to look for and how to best practice calculating exercise testing for various sports and athletes, how should we focus on implementing this criterion? One, and possibly the largest way, is to have our athletes focused on the principles of exercise testing. These are individuality, specificity, progression, overload, adaptation, recovery, and reversibility. Without going into definitions or details, these are the 7 principles that Team USA put on their website to be both inclusive and definitive about the athlete's progression in their sport. As far as staff or testers go, we always want to practice reproducibility, reliability, validity, and consistency to ensure that we are doing the athletes justice in all of their hard work that they are putting in on and off the court or field. Finally, I'd like to discuss how these tests can become possible. So everything we have discussed today may seem very far-fetched, and people may not think that it is something available to the general public. And on the contrary, it really most certainly is. A great example of this is my alma mater, Samford University. We had what was called the SamFit program that allowed individuals or teams to get tested at a discounted rate. So this program features body comp assessments, cardio fitness assessments, anaerobic fitness assessments, and finally, fitness and wellness packages. The importance in mentioning this is that so many athletes and teams work so hard and are so deserving of knowing their fitness values. Not only is this generally helpful, but sometimes it is a driving force to the way an athlete trains or the way a coach instructs changes in the players' programs. Universities do have the capability to serve by administering these tests to athletes in their very own labs. So in conclusion, the biggest thing is putting our athletes first. One way we can all do this, regardless of setting, is by using evidence-based practice supported by research. Studies are not just done so that we cannot use them. Each exercise testing study was done for the betterment of the field, so that we as scientists, healthcare workers, researchers, or whoever can best inform and advise our clients, participants, and patients. We also want to practice consistency across testing timelines of our participants and consider subjectivity in our athletes and their sports. Not one person is the same. And so we want to always be aware of any changes that should be made before testing begins, so that we are always delivering the best possible result in testing for our athletes of any scale. Next, we always want to remember the efficiency and efficacy of the tests we are administering. Because we work to serve our athletes and collect the best data possible, what is conducted in a lab-based setting should have the ability to be reproduced with accurate and consistent data. Another very important, if not the most important aspect, is remembering sport-related characteristics of our athletes. So in collecting the data, working with the team captains and coaches, we should always remember that each sport is different, with different moving parts. These characteristics are what joins the athlete to their sport, and we want to do our best as testers to illustrate that. And finally, as we just mentioned, take advantage of university settings. Don't be afraid to ask if these tests are available to you, because most of the time they are. So thank you all for allowing me to present on this topic, and thank you to the conference leaders for making this possible during the midst of chaos. And at this time, I can take any questions that are there.
So Maddie, it looks like we've had a ton of questions already as you were presenting, and
Sure.
I could definitely start you off with one of them.
Sure.
We have a question here that states, how do you recommend us to measure the same capacities without all of these instruments?
I think that is one way that it separates field-based and lab-based testing. Unfortunately, if you don't have all of this material, then it may not be possible to stick only to lab-based testing. However, most of the time, things can become apparent when teams do have resources and funding to spend on testing. You'll see most of the time that some high performance coaches advocate to allow teams to have equipment like this.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question here. You had mentioned, that we are in this interesting period of time right now and us all being remote. So we have a question here about, can SAMFIT assessments be completed remotely? And what is the range in price for the discounted rates?
Yeah, so actually all of that is online. You can go to Google and type in SAMFIT program at Samford University, and there's a couple options that'll pop up. There's one, a PDF that most people use to reference pricing. I do know that ADEXA, I think it's right at $80. Other tests range from between 75 to 100 or 125, I believe. It was a good reference to this kind of crazy time. My research project here at Lakeshore, we are able to send this equipment, portable pieces of equipment, to our participants' houses, and they record their data. We kind of do what's called like a Zoom or a FaceTime and get their data from them, and so nobody is really missing out on their testing or these their testing values.
Perfect. I'm gonna combine two questions here. So the first one is, when I used the BIA, we were not able to acquire a measurement because their feet were not placed on the floor. Have you tested athletes with disabilities who use wheelchairs and acquired a measurement? How are you able to acquire an accurate reading? And then the second question is asking pretty much the same thing, but just anything you would recommend for a wheelchair tennis player.
Oh, tennis is my sport, so we'll come back to that. BIA, I know that sometimes in our lab, if our participants are comfortable either transferring to another chair or placing their feet on the floor, that can enhance their reading. Of course, we would never ask them to try to stand in a support or anything like that, but simply placing their feet on the floor can increase the conductivity and the signal that's being sent through their body. And then tennis players, in considering training or in considering lab testing, values should be consistent across all sports at all time testing periods. If you're looking to increase your training, you can always get with a coach who knows disability-specific training programs, and that is extremely helpful.
Great. What training and expertise does the tester need? So where do you think the expertise falls for the tester, and maybe where can they even begin to acquire or get that knowledge if they don't have it?
Right. So most of the time, if you have a new piece of equipment delivered to your lab, you can get in a training session that can help you increase your expertise. But most of the times, equipment nowadays is either very inclusive in the way that they instruct you on how to learn their pieces of equipment, or you can most of the time pay to become more of an expertise. Sometimes in a lab, you don't really need that. You just need to know the basis of what you're testing. Sometimes you do need to know that. And so it's good to know resources across the spectrum.
Great. And we have a few more questions here, but I just want to remind everybody that if you have any questions that come up, please go ahead and go towards the bottom of your screen and insert them into the Q&A feature. I know there's some coming in as I'm speaking, but just want to remind everybody. Maddie, another question related to insurance. Is this testing covered under insurance as part of pre-participation evaluations? That's from Melissa.
That's for participants or for athletes, or did it say?
It doesn't specify, but maybe you could speak to both.
Sure. So when we have participants come into the lab, we don't contact their insurance companies. They do this as a means of progression in their own health. And so we don't ask them any medical questions. We don't need to know anything about their insurance. And same goes for athletes. So when our elite performers come down here, so for example, wheelchair rugby, to my knowledge, their insurance company is also not involved. They just come down to the lab, and then we do all of this testing and data for them, and then report back to their high performance coaches.
Got it. I'm sure everybody's appreciative of that helpful information. Another question here. Do you recommend a specific place where attendees can find research about this kind of testing for Paralympic athletes?
Actually, yes. Housed in Lakeshore it's what's called NICPAD. It stands for the National Center of Health, Physical Activity, and Disability. And they're actually one of the largest online resources that are applicable to daily settings, research, and resources. There's an advocacy setting, there's government and policy. And so contacting anyone within the NICPAD spectrum is to anyone's benefit. But also contacting your university settings, like we mentioned, they probably also know more about testing available in your specific area.
Great. We have another question here. This question is from Ronald. Maddie, how does this all change with various disabilities, for example, CP high tone?
So varying disabilities, that's a great question. Working in research, we see that a lot. Dealing with the actual exercise testing itself, really what changes the most is the pieces of equipment that are used. We here at Lakeshore have access to a lot of really cool pieces of equipment that are modifiable and adaptable, varying based on your disability. So no one disability is excluded from this kind of testing because of the equipment that we have. Most of the time, you'll only find that in a hospital setting. I think it's kind of rare to find that in a normal research setting or resource setting. So I would advise reaching out to some hospitals or your local researchers to see if that's available.
Thank you for that answer. Another question. As a grassroots organization, how could we or do we get connected with a group like yours?
Yeah, so you can call the NICPAD organization. We communicate a lot between them. And so you can also call NICPAD. We have some resources that I'd be happy to email you individually just to kind of put our foot in the door and also allow you to contact us. We do a lot of different things here at Lakeshore, and so we always really appreciate. We reach out to people, and we love when people reach out to us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any more questions? Oh, here's another one. What is your favorite research project that you have worked on?
My current project, it's called Super Health. It's a scale-up research project, and it truly is my favorite to date. I'm able to work with so many different people across such a large area, and right now we have about 200 current participants, and so my sample size is never too small. It gives me so many friends, and it allows me to kind of explore things inside and outside of my comfort area.
That's great. Can you speak more to the project that you worked on at Samford?
Sure. I actually worked on quite a few projects at Samford. We as undergraduate students were allowed to take part in undergraduate projects. And so my senior project was about pregnancy and pregnant women and how that affects their metabolic rate. If you're referring to the SAMFIT program, what we did with that is bring in our athletic teams, and we put them through a series of exercise and fitness testing. And we collected their data and then reported that back to the coach so that the coach could then effectively and adequately create training programs for their athletes.
Great. And another one here, does this type of work exist anywhere else?
Yes, I would say so. Research is not uncommon. However, we have very close ties with UAB as we are the UAB Lakeshore Collaborative. So we are able to kind of open more doors with our research. I wouldn't say that that's not anywhere else. I just am not familiar off the top of my head where extensive research projects to this degree are available, but that's not to say that they don't exist.
Right, I'd imagine that there's definitely ways to find those, and you know, we could definitely help point people to resources. Another question here from Renee. Can Maddie tell us more about the Lakeshore Foundation, its mission, geographic reach, etc.?
Sure. We're located in Birmingham, Alabama. For our research studies, we typically don't really have that much of a geographic reach. We do have some studies where you'll come into the Lakeshore Foundation and do all of your stuff here. And we also have research studies where you can be a participant in California or New York, and you can still participate in some of our research studies. The Lakeshore Foundation itself is part fitness facility and part research and NICPAD organization. So what we do is we work super close with all of our communications teams, our research department, our advocacy and policy department. We have a lot of ties within the USOPC, a lot of organizations we kind of work hand in hand with. And so a lot of what we do is we serve as a resource database kind of, and we allow people to come in, use our facility, get a good workout in, swim. It's super fun being able to see everything that Lakeshore has to offer.
Yeah, I'm sure that's incredibly just rewarding to your work.
Absolutely.
Do you find that you work mostly with individual athletes or with teams? Is there kind of one over the other that you see more?
Yeah, absolutely. I typically work with teams. So Lakeshore has kind of like a sports science sector, and I got really involved in that when I started here a year ago. We work with the wheelchair rugby team, basketball, tennis, soccer. We host tournaments here. I'm sure I'm forgetting sports, but we do typically see more team interaction versus just single athlete interaction.
Right. Um, the questions are coming in now rapidly, I think, because we know we're getting close. But here's another one from Mary. We are working on a 6-week walk/run program with athletes who are blind and visually impaired. What kind of tests would you recommend us performing?
That's so interesting. You can still conduct all of these same testing. You'll just instruct them a little bit differently once you're strapping them into all of the equipment. You'll still so for example, with the RPE chart, if someone on your team does ASL, you can instruct them on how to give them their intensity. For someone who is a visually impaired athlete, you can instruct them just by speaking to them, placing them in certain positions and allowing them to follow through. But training programs I'm not as familiar with. I feel like they'd be similar if you're working on a walk and run or push walk 6 minutes.
Right. Another question here, can we send participants or athletes to you?
Sure, absolutely. We have a huge recruiting sector here at Lakeshore, and so we like to think that there's something for everybody out there. And so we are always welcome to people inquiring about the things we have, and we are very used to calling people and informing them of some of the new things that we've got going on. So we kind of have a really large database of people that are interested in Lakeshore or the things that Lakeshore has to offer.
Yeah, and there seems to be a tremendous amount of interest, even just from attendees in the chat, wanting to know how they can be more involved with these projects. Is there a takeaway or a first step that you would tell those that have extreme interest in being involved?
Sure. You can actually just Google the Lakeshore Foundation. Our front desk staff is amazing. They take a lot of really great notes and refer to us. We have a communication staff and we have a recruitment staff. And so if you just kind of tell them what you're interested in, we know who to contact you with so that you can be communicated to, you can be referred to, and then most importantly, you can be valued at Lakeshore. We really love when people come in here and kind of make this place their home.
Excellent. Thank you. We're coming up on time, everybody, but I just want to give a tremendous thanks to Madi and Lakeshore for a really, really interesting and engaging presentation. So many questions and so many positive comments in the chat, which is so heartwarming to see all the time. So thank you so much for being here and joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And to everybody that's attending, thank you for being such great participants. We are putting a survey in the chat, and then again, you will see it when you exit this, and we thank you for all your feedback around not only this session, but any other sessions that you have attended and given us that feedback for. So that will be there in a moment if it's not. And you could stay involved in the conversation. You can let us know how we're doing. You could share any thoughts throughout the conference on social media, once again, using the hashtag MoveUnited. And we thank you for joining us and hope that you tune in for the final session of the day coming up shortly. And we're really appreciative of this great community. Thanks again. Have a good one.